but we were talking about his draft picks. And I believe we were referencing his first draft as the Lucas Salmonich, Quindary Weatherspoon draft. And those were kind of the two that we talked about that maybe what weren't the best picks. But I just went on his NBA.com profile. He became the general managers for the Spurs in July of 2019, which means he didn't pick that draft. So we might have just been thinking summer 2019, you know what I'm saying? And thinking that he made those picks when he actually didn't. His first picks were Devin Vassell and Trey Jones. So I mean, when you start to look at the Spurs draft picks, we don't know how Primo would have ended up turning out, but that was completely out of his control. That wasn't anything basketball wise. And then who was this? I'm forgetting the second round pick in the Primo draft. I was trying to pull it up.
It was the sharpshooter that's no longer with us from Iowa.
Oh, Joe Wieskamp.
Joe Wieskamp,
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you could say that's a little bit of a scratch draft, but we didn't cut Wieskamp. We cut Wieskamp basically because we picked up Romeo in the trade with the Celtics. So it's like, you see what I'm saying? The person that we're playing over him is an asset that Brian Wright is an asset because of Brian Wright, essentially. Obviously, the Spurs front office and RC Buford and Pop are still involved as well. So I don't want to, we definitely got to give them still some credit. But still, these are moves that are like, the final okay was Brian Wright. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, okay, you can say Primo, that's an asterisk. Wieskamp, you ended up cutting him, but it's for somebody else that you picked up that you felt like was better for this season. And then at the end of the day, also, when you look at the team this year, you signed Julian Champagnie, who we would probably both agree has a higher ceiling than Wieskamp ever did. God bless Wieskamp. Hope he stays in the league. But you know what I'm saying? Like, there's so many, like, for every deficiency that you find, other than wins and losses, but that was just the nature of last season. That was kind of the goal at the end of the day anyway. It feels like you can find, something that substituted it. Like I said, if you want to say, if you want to talk about Wieskamp getting cut, you can mention Champagnie or Romeo. If you want to talk about losing Josh Primo, let's talk about the 3 first-round draft picks we had last season, Ethan, where we picked 2 guards. You know what I'm saying? To kind of make up for that because of the other moves that Brian Wright has made. Now, granted, I think we would have had those picks regardless of the Primo situation, but still, because you were in that situation where you can have 2 first-round picks, and we'll have to see how Blake Wesley pans out. That's probably the biggest question mark right now. But after last season, you look at Jeremy Sohan and Malachi Branham, and it's just like, like I said, the 2021 draft is kind of just an unfortunate thing in itself. But the other 2, Trey Jones, Devin Vassell, guys part of the roster moving forward, right? And then you've got Jeremy Sohan and Malachi Branham, like other 2 established dudes. You know what I'm saying? So we know the draft record has been really solid. And if someone wants to hone in on 2021, I'm just giving him a little bit of a pass there. And I think that that's okay and reasonable. But then on top of that, you've got all the assets that we've picked up, Ethan. It's, these are our newest Spurs, Ethan, are the prime example. Shetty Osman, Reggie Bullock, obviously Lamar Stevens left. But Cam Payne is another one. I mean, those are all trades where we just had the assets in the cap room because of the situation that Brian Wright put us in, essentially, with the help of everybody else who works around him. We were in the position to where we were, the prime suspect to help facilitate these trades and take on some pretty solid role players for a young team that, like we said, at the worst, these dudes are going to benefit our guys in training camp. Whoever gets cut, which most likely I think 2 of those 3, Ethan, that we have to cut is going to be Devontae Graham and Kem Birch. So really, 2 out of those 3 in Shetty Osman, Reggie Bullock, and Cam Payne are going to be on the roster. Minus say like Cam Payne doesn't want to play for the team, which we've talked about before. But even in that situation, then you get Shetty and Reggie. Like these are just moves that are going to benefit the team regardless. Like, okay, Reggie beats somebody out. That means he beat somebody out. And then you've got a veteran shooter who's played on a lot of different teams with multiple different stars to play alongside, Wembanyama in his first year and help the team. I mean, there's just, I know I'm going off a little bit here, Ethan.
No, you're fine.
Talking for a while, but like, there's just, there's so much stuff that he does well. I'm even losing my train of thought again here, getting
No,
caught up
you're
in all this stuff I'm saying.
you're all right. I mean, the blueprint, like you're saying, it was 100% clear. It was bring on valuable assets, role players, and then build up their trade stock, trade them for second round or first round picks or pick swaps. So we've accumulated all these assets and these draft
We
assets.
didn't even talk about Jay Rich.
We didn't talk about Jay Rich, Jakob Pertl, all these guys that we've moved on, and we still managed to fill the roster with solid players, like you were saying. Champagny, Devonte Graham filled a role for us last year in the absence
Charles
of Jay
Bassey.
Rich. Charles Bassey was another guy that we signed from the trash heap. He was able to find guys off of Philadelphia's
G
team that they
League,
just
yeah.
threw away, and they become very valuable role players for the Spurs. And now we end up with Campaign, Bullock, and Chetty Osman, who, I mean, there's really no losing scenario for the Spurs with those three players. Like one of them might be cut, sure, but you can hang on to them and they can play valuable minutes for the Spurs next season and really help develop our young guys. Or you can trade them at the deadline and continue to accumulate first and second
Exactly.
round picks for the
There's
future.
no losing situation with these guys.
And we still have cap space. We're still probably top 10, if not top 5 in the NBA as far as cap space available going into next offseason.
I think actually Paul Garcia tweeted here. Keep talking, Ethan. I'm gonna pull up a tweet about that actually.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the question would be going into next offseason. Do we try and make a big splash play to get another free agent signing? I doubt it. I think we'll just continue to move meticulously and thoughtfully, as Brian Wright has done since he, came on board. And what I love about what Brian Wright's been able to do, and the entire Spurs front office, Jude, is it reminds me of like when you first started watching Marvel movies. I don't know if you're into the MCU, but like you're
Yeah,
like, oh, these are just fun movies, and then you see Endgame and you go back and watch them all, and you're like, oh my god, this was all planned. Like you had no idea these little
I
details were
was
going to
I
be
was the
so
guy who watched
significant.
them all. Like I went and watched like all of them in order again
Yeah,
before Endgame came out. But I totally get what you're saying. Like you didn't realize it when you're growing up watching the movies, or us.
yeah,
Just watching these moves that the Spurs are making, we weren't realizing the whole time they're setting up for Victor Wembanyama. Um,
literally.
and it makes sense because of the timeline, but we just I don't know, we're not GMs, Ethan. We're
Yeah,
so caught up in the now, being fans, doing this show on YouTube, that that even though it was kind of in front of our face, we
hmm
still didn't even see it. But I think a lot of Spurs fans didn't realize that until really this season, which of course was after the Derrick and Dejounte trades at the deadline and in the offseason. And once we did that, then it was like, okay, things are kind of clear. But it wasn't clear until it was like, okay, this is like the tank year. You know what I'm
hmm
saying? Which is also typical for Spurs fashion. But that
yeah,
tweet that I was talking about, Ethan, I'm about to get it up for us here in a second. So shout out to Paul Garcia. He works with what is it again? Project Spurs. That's the name of it. Yeah. OG. But as you can see right there, Ethan, so though we don't know the official terms of Mamu and Sissoko's deals, the Spurs are projected to be 1 million over the salary cap now that all players have officially signed their deals. San Antonio is 28.2 million under the tax. But that's really the key. Honestly, I'm glad we brought up this point, Ethan, because I brought up this tweet because while I forget exactly how the point is we do still have cap space because the
we still
tax is
have
all
to
that
waive
matters.
guys.
Yeah, and tax is all that matters
hmm
under the new CBA. So even though we are over the cap, like I was right in that, it's also like your point is still correct because everybody still keeps dipping into the tax anyway. Like we
hmm
still have 28 million left in the tax, which a lot of teams don't have.
And we're going to cut 3 guys before the season starts. And we have expiring deals going into
Yep.
next offseason. And we'll probably trade a couple contracts at the deadline. And the trade market has been, to me, the most valuable part of Brian Wright taking over for the Spurs because we were never active in the trade market. And to be frank, we were bad at trades. Like, I think back to Rudy Gay, Patty Mills, LaMarcus Aldridge, Marco Bellinelli, like a bunch of veterans that
He
we
had
should
to
have
go
traded.
out of the Spurs norm. Sorry to
Yes.
interrupt you.
No, you're fine. We should have traded those 4 guys way prior to when they actually left the Spurs. And I think that situation, we bought all those. We bought LaMarcus out, and I think we just let Patty and Rudy and Marco walk after
Yep.
their
Yep.
contracts ended. So we didn't get anything from those 4 players.
Yep.
We traded DeMar. That was a great decision. And then from that point forward, it was like, okay, we're going to trade everyone at their peak, like abilities, so that their value is like through the roof. So we got probably way too much for Dejounte, to be completely frank. We probably got a little, Derek White's trade probably ended up being right where it should have been because
But
of
okay, but think
his
of the
value moving
assets we
forward.
got off of that. That's the
You're
thing,
not
because
wrong.
we got Jay Rich in that trade. So that's
Yep.
4 second-round picks right there.
True, true. I didn't think about that because we flipped Jay Rich, who was worthless in the NBA when we got him. To be frank, I mean, no offense to Jay Rich, I love him.
We revived him.
We revived. He was a throw-in to make money work. Like he wasn't even
He
playing for
was
the Boston
supposed to be
Celtics.
what he was for us. The crazy thing is what he was for us is what he was supposed to be in Boston.
Yeah, and I mean, poor Jay Rich. I mean, in
Right.
Miami was his peak, and then he went to Philly where he was like pretty good, and then it just kind of gradually dipped when he went to Dallas and then Boston. Like he had shooting woes. Comes to the Spurs, reignites his career. We get 4 seconds from him and Devontae Graham,
Bro.
who wasn't playing for the Pelicans, who now plays for the Spurs, who probably boosted his trade value because he had like
Oh,
a 30 piece and was just chucking shots. Now I'm sure there are fans like in LA or New York that are like, Devontae Graham's the guy we should be going for, a shooter, a backup point guard. So suddenly we're probably going to get a couple seconds for him. Like we're just rekindling these guys. Chetty Osman's probably going to win Sixth Man of the Year now because he's on the Spurs. He's going to have like an
dude.
incredible season.
Dude, while you're talking, I'm just realizing Jay Rich literally just took like hey man, like we traded him, bro. Play 2 semesters here with Pop.
Yeah,
Get your get your get your stuff back together. Like here's NBA like boot camp. Like you know
hmm
what I mean? Like,
pretty
you're
much.
come to Pop boot camp for half of 2 seasons. Look, you'll be a free agent. You can go back to Miami coming off a finals run in a role
Yep,
where they need you. And really, if we want to talk about like the 2 systems in the NBA, like the Heat are very similar to the Spurs, not in
true.
necessarily play style, but in the sense that they can have dudes like Max Strus and Duncan Robinson like be playing big in playoff games. Like we
Yes.
had Jay Sims doing the same thing because of the culture, the Heat culture, that Pat Riley, Eric Spoelstra culture that just disseminates throughout the building, especially when you got a guy like Jimmy at the head of it. But enough about the Heat. The point is, I think Jay Rich is going to do well in Miami. I think he'll do similar to how he did in San Antonio. But we already mentioned how we were happy about Jay Rich before, but I'm so glad you touched on this, Ethan, and you touched on Devontae Graham as well, because earlier when I was talking about this and just talking about the aspects of him, it's not just that he's drafted well or that he's put us in the position to where we're able to be a part of these 3-team trades to facilitate and gain assets from around the league because of the position we're in, but it's also what he's done on the trade market, like you said. I mean, and that's how I kind of, when I interrupted you there and I mentioned like the Spurs were not like that. We did not do midseason trades, like especially like of our key players. And I know that was a good decision considering the position that the Spurs were in and what they had coming up on the roster with guys like Keldon, Devin, and Trey. But at the same time, like I said, in the moment, it's like Derek White and DeJounte Murray were kind of your stabilizers. They were the 2 guys who knew how to run the offense.
Yeah.
Pop had built both of them up. And I didn't. It almost felt like when we traded Derek that okay, that was the decision. Like
hmm
as much as like as over time the DeJounte thing has made more sense. In the moment that season, it was like okay, at the deadline there was a little bit more smoke, but it was like, are we going to trade Derek or DeJounte? Because it feels like now that we've played half a season with both of them, unfortunately, our fears have been unearthed. They probably don't fit that well next to each other. And so even in that moment, it was like, okay, they just picked DeJounte, right?
Yeah.
And then that wasn't the case either. So that's the other thing that's kind of been the theme throughout all of this. And this kind of ties back into when I talked about how, the Spurs weren't tanking until it was like, this is the season we want to tank, like
hmm
it wasn't literally until the July before that season that they were in full tank mode. He's been stealthy with his decisions as well. And obviously I'm sure other NBA front office types could smell it a little bit, especially with the Spurs track record. But for us as fans and everybody observing in our audience,
hmm
it was very stealthy, which is
Well,
another thing that you like to see.
if you're a fan of Gilbert Arenas and his podcast, you might even say it was set up by the NBA.
Right.
Because he was like, so
Hey,
the
I
Spurs got
said it was
Wemby.
rigged on our live show, so I
Yep.
got nothing to say.
He absolutely believes it's rigged. He was like, they did it and no one said a word. And he was like, every other team that tanked, they were like talking about it. It was national media coverage. It was like the Spurs, they were obviously tanking and nobody said a damn word.
No,
I was
but
like,
he
you're
is
right.
right about that though,
Yeah.
because still it felt like remember even like this was like a week before the draft. It was like who is the best fit for Wembanyama? And it was like Portland,
Yeah.
and I get it. Obviously they have Dame, but still it was like every team other than the
Hmm.
Spurs. Now that was a little bit of a unique example there, but still in other conversations on ESPN, I'm sure so many of you watched. And as per usual, until he got drafted by us, we're not going to be on there.
Yeah.
you
Suddenly
know?
everyone was like, oh, yeah, I forgot they exist.